Hey everybody, it's Justin. Let me just get things squared away so I can see myself. Yeah, so Sonic Boom Live. We're missing one of the normal duo. Usually it's me and Eric doing a live broadcast that covers video game news from an industry perspective. Um, Today, Eric's down for the count with a migraine, so we won't be seeing him, as far as I know, unless he makes some sort of guest appearance. But we can still do the show by myself. If that's your thing, continue watching. Yeah, so usually Sonic Boom Live is a program where we go over the latest game industry news. I am from the video game industry. I own a company with Eric, the co-host of the show, where we basically give our best insights on anything from, marketing talk or strategy of companies and sort of overall trends where the game industry seems to be going. I think it's particularly an exciting time because there's a lot of fundamental shifts happening in the video game industry, from moving to streaming platforms to seeing how the divide between independent game and AAA blockbuster has shifted over these past 10 years. Now that we have AA games that we didn't really have before. So there's lots of interesting stuff going on. So we give you our best insights. We stream every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So you can tune in on YouTube or Twitch at youtube.com/sonicboomtv or twitch.com or twitch.tv/sonicboomtv. Either of those will get you to our programs. If you want to see past episodes, your best bet is doing it through youtube.com/sonicboomtv, where you can find all of our past shows. And if you like our software, which is Koreographer, a Unity tool, you can find videos for tutorials and help there as well. So, this week, let me tell you about what's going on. We have a couple interesting news stories, first of which is Haven Studios, which is a brand new studio that has not yet produced a game, headed by Jade Raymond, is joining Sony officially as a PlayStation Studios member. What's interesting about this is that basically it finalized this past week, but with that we got some information from both Jade Raymond, the CEO, and Sony making statements about what they can expect from Haven Studios. And I think there's some interesting tidbits in there, specifically about how Sony is going about making purchases for the PlayStation family and what it might say about their overall strategy. And we can kind of compare and contrast this against Microsoft, which has, on paper, seems very similar. They're going about purchasing companies, but I think there's very different strategies about how each company is doing it. We'll talk about that. Next bit of information is E3. E3 has been in a bad place for a couple of years now. It goes back even further, and I can go over and enlighten people about what was going on with E3 way back when. But the important news is that they canceled E3 2022, and we've got Summer Games Fest in instead. But E3 2023 is coming back with some help of the organizers from PAX. Penny Arcade Expo, if those don't know, but if you're watching this show, I'm certain you do. We'll talk about why that's important to the overall industry and the health of E3 as a, pop culture or cultural event for the game industry. It could be good news, but I'll go over the implications as well. And then the final bit of information is Unity. Unity is a game development engine that's typically used by independent game developers. They just bought this new company, Ironclad, an Israeli-based company that is good with data mining but has quite a questionable past. They made the purchase just after they had a round of layoffs, so there's quite a lot of disdain towards this position that they've taken, the company that they purchased, and so I'll go over the details of the purchase and the details of what it might mean without trying to be too speculative. So if you want to learn more about that and learn more about what these news articles or like news bits mean for the industry, join us and it'll get you more information, I guess. If you do like this type of content, please like and subscribe. I know you hear this from every YouTube video, but I think it works with the algorithm. And if you actually do interact with the channel, that does help us out. So if you like the content, please follow along and we'll get into it. So let me prep my notes real quick. All right. So the first bit of news. Haven Studios is fully purchased by PlayStation at this point. Joins the PlayStation family for real this time. The bit of backstory behind Haven Studios, they're kind of been on this whirlwind growth path. It's kind of weird for game industry in general. In March 2021, Jade Raymond announced that the studio is forming. Jade Raymond is former head of Assassin's Creed development studio, so she was heading up the series for a long time and was like the mouthpiece for Ubisoft at like the beginning of the PlayStation 3 era. She went on to work at EA and she headed up the Star Wars franchises. Not Respawn's, but like there's a studio that she was within that was out of Montreal that had worked on I think it's called Squadrons, and had done some work with Battlefront and a couple other things. That she moved from there, unknown exactly when that was, but in 2021 she announced the studio Haven Studios would be working on a PlayStation game, and this kind of corresponded with a lot of the PlayStation 5 news that was coming out. All good news. But in that same month, Sony announced intentions to buy Haven Studios, which is very strange because A, they had not had a single game and any tech that was known at the time. But what we did know is Jade Raymond was helming it, who's a pretty big name in the game industry. And we got a lot of really great talent that was joining her at the time. At the point that the purchase announcement was made, which wasn't finalized. It was just the intent to do it, and they had reached some sort of agreement that for terms that it was going to be purchased. The studio started growing, and in like less than a year, went from like 50 people to like 150. So quite a lot of growth. 150 game studio, especially a brand new one that does not have any games under its belt that at least been released, is quite a lot of growth in a very short period of time. So that's all odd. Odd because a large studio like, or a large group like Sony or PlayStation Studios was out of the gate ready to buy a game company who had not produced a game. They just pretty much had the credentials of the people who were joining the team and the CEO of the team. All good. This week, we just find out that the deal was finalized, and Haven Studios is now officially part of the PlayStation family. This joins quite a few other prestigious studios like Santa Monica Studios, makers of God of War, Naughty Dog, the makers of the Uncharted, and Last of Us, Naughty Dog, or excuse me, I said Naughty Dog, Sucker Punch, the makers of Ghost of Tsushima, and prior to that, Infamous, and I think Thieves Raccoonus. What is that called? I can't remember its name. But yeah, the other game, Sly Cooper. There we go. Sly Cooper as well. And they have like quite a big stable of great studios, particularly during the PS3 and PS4 era. They focused mostly on these single player like narrative adventure types that were really well received, really drove attention to the PlayStation platform, and drove sales of the PlayStation 4. Now coming into the PS5 era, there's a shakeup at the PlayStation Game Studios. New head comes in, Herman Hulst kind of leads up the game studio. He comes from a more pragmatic business side, and he was originally of Horizon Zero Dawn's developer. I'm blanking on the name of that. It's a very long day for me, so I'm giving you what I got. either way, he joins the team. He kind of restructures things and putting more of an emphasis on like how's the best way to maximize value out of these like enormous budgeted games, right? Games went from probably during the PS3 era around 25 to $50 million per game to the PS5 era where we're like well over $100 million per game, if not like 200 to 300. Now the game is to make their money back when they push over 4 million copies sold or something like that. They start going to profitable territory with games like God of War selling 12 to 14 million, and that sort of drives this huge profitability for PlayStation as game studios. What happens in the PS5 era is just like Xbox, they start making very strategic buys. But what's interesting about their decisions about what they decide to, or what they're buying is instead of buying game studios that are really important to making some sort of huge, AAA game that is going to help them sell consoles. Instead, they start focusing kind of the way that their internal structure works. And this was something that was developing during the PS4. You started seeing a lot of cross-studio collaboration. So you'd have like narrative designers coming from Naughty Dog to help out other studios that were trying to scale out. And this was particularly important to like sort of green studios. Sony would buy like these really small studios that had created something really artistic and amazing, probably well funded and well budgeted, and they look at ways to scale them. So they started buying studios that were, or they started leveraging their studios for those reasons. So the makers of Concrete Genie might have been lended the narration team or narrative team from Naughty Dog to help them bolster their narrative storytelling. Motion capture studios from one group may be used across the other, and so on. Like a really good example of this is I think it's Avalanche, the makers of Days Gone. Days Gone, the tech that was being developed for that was really impressive. Sony buys them for it, and this is like their sort of horde crowd, AI systems and being able to render it relatively efficiently. But it got like a heavy pass on narrative with Naughty Dog's help. So you start seeing this way that like Sony starts strategizing with the way that they're going to buy studios and use studios to leverage like specific talents to help make all their games much better. So PlayStation 5 era comes in, they buy the makers of Returnal. Probably this one's more specifically on they're a great game studio, but they want to scale them to AAA. Then you see them buy studios that help them port games to PC that are particularly talented at doing remasters of games. And so you start seeing this sort of thing happening where you're like, these teams have specializations that could be leveraged. A really good example of this is also Bungie, who makes Destiny and has like some of the most impressive back-end systems to create like these persistent online games. This is something Sony is now holding very important as they're creating quite a few games that are in this space. And this is where Haven Studios comes in. Haven Studios, the only thing we know about it is they are making a massive multiplayer game. It's going to be more friendly, as I think Hermit Holst mentioned. But what really comes to attention here is in the press releases during this purchase, Jade Raymond mentions that she's super excited to be working with Mark Cerny. Mark Cerny, as you might have known, helped design the PS4 and PS5. And another important thing is he had worked at Naughty Dog and quite a few studios and helped and also developed Knack. Knack being the name of the game, Knack 2. This is important because Mark Cerny, although you may know him for him talking about how a console is developed and the reasons why and helped make PlayStation 4 such a competitive platform, what he's also known for is creating methods for innovating before releasing. And it's like focusing your development intents on like creating novelty in important places, dedicating resources in areas, and before you pitch, being able to do these like sort of cross sections of the game that give you a really good feel about what the game is going to be, and and how to scale that. And these are very important philosophies with game development because it's extremely costly, and if you spend a lot of time developing costly games that aren't going to catch and are not interesting and don't have interesting aspects to them, then they fail and you'll lose a couple $100 million if you can't recoup your costs. So Sony giving Mark Cerny a more, I guess, talented and veteran-like team like Jade Raymond's may be creating the template for how to take studios and turn them from small studio to AAA studio that can really create competitive content that's up there with God of War or anything that their more tenured studios are developing. And this is particularly useful because you could spend a lot of money to acquire a large studio that's made AAA games like Activision on a multi-billion-dollar purchase. This is something Sony can't do, but they can certainly take a small team and teach them how to create really great product efficiently. And this is a more cost-effective way of getting innovation and AAA quality games without sort of throwing away billions of dollars to do it. This is in strict contrast with the way Microsoft and Xbox have been doing things, both of which kind of like Sony and Microsoft at the same time were ramping up purchases during the PS5 and Xbox Series launch. But with Microsoft, it was about getting as much content as possible to justify a monthly subscription service and Xbox Game Pass. And Microsoft's in a unique position because they are huge and they have this giant operating system and office software that helps them use billions of dollars to sort of create a new business. Sony has to take a different approach, which is about how to efficiently grow companies and how to not make $1 billion of purchases to compete with Microsoft, but how to make small purchases and get a lot of teams efficiently producing AAA content. So I think this is kind of interesting with the way that Sony's been going about things, and this is why the Haven Studios purchase is particularly interesting, because I think they're buying the studio probably with not a whole lot of money comparatively, but are looking to scale this team into a AAA studio that's just as productive as Insomniac, for instance. All right, next set of news. E3 tries to redefine itself with the help of the organizer of PAX. As I mentioned earlier in the prefacing of this whole episode, E3 has kind of been knocked down pretty hard. It kind of started, I don't know, over 10 years ago, where I think as the gaming culture shifted towards being more inclusive, we started realizing that the E3 of past, which was all about having women in few clothes and catering specifically to this male gamer archetype that wasn't exactly true, was sort of fading away, and E3 was taking the sort of information that was coming out about how E3s were done in the past and what the sort of parties that were happening were beginning to heavily redefine what E3 could be because of its need to be more inclusive to both the gamers that would attend, the industry people that would attend, and the people who make up the game companies that make the games that we love. So this was a kind of a knockback for them. But the real nail in the coffin was as digital media sort of expanded and we could get news about anything, anytime, and we could get live broadcasts, we started to see game companies back out of E3, which is kind of critical to E3's bread and butter. E3 first and foremost was a summer festival to really focus on the games that were going to be coming out in the fall. So every game manufacturer that had something to show off for the fall had something there, but on top of that, they tend to show what they had in works in 2 years out. Most importantly, Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft they would have these big press conferences that would act as their sort of year forward projections. It was important to them to show what you could get or what their consoles were going to get you. So they had to kind of propose to everybody, if you buy a Switch, these are the type of games that you can expect. And it's extremely important to them to do that, but extremely expensive. To do it at E3 at the time frame that was set during E3, it meant that they were not on the press schedule that they'd want. They'd have to get their studios to produce something that showed the best version of whatever they're going to show. And this was easier back during the PS2, PS3 era, when games were on like a 2 to 3 year development cycle. But now that we've seen games like a balloon pass up to be like 3 to 5 years for AAA titles, it becomes really difficult to say, hey, we're making a God of War, but I can't show you anything because it's, gray boxed only. And finding that, you could only show stuff for these games 1 to 2 years out from the release, and it really took a lot to create like a vertical slice that would show you the best version of what it was. Sony became really adept at this, but a lot of studios instead opted to do 3 trailers, or in a worse situation would be creating games that weren't real. You found this like in Watch Dogs, where basically they go, I think the PlayStation 3 is going to be capable of doing this, or the PlayStation 4 is going to be capable of doing this. So they created like mock-ups, simulations of what they think the games would look like, but ultimately they'd always fall short, and people would see a version of the game 1 year, and then 2 years later they'd actually show it, and suddenly people would be like, I don't want this game. This is not what I had expected. Prime examples, Cyberpunk 2077, and what they showed might be the experience on the PlayStation 4. In reality, none of that was possible, and it was the PC version that was largely reflective of what they did show. So these are all bad things for game companies, and it's extremely important that they have these best possible press releases. So Nintendo was first to go, and they said, we're not doing E3, we're not holding to your schedule, we're going to have our own series of releases, and around E3 we'll have a big one. But this allows us to control our narrative. This allows us to control how we present things. We're not dealing with doing things on stage and having things break and having it be bigger news than what you've been working towards. And this is one massive nail in the coffin for E3, because not only now do they have scandals and they're trying to redefine themselves, but now your biggest game companies are pulling out and saying, we don't want to deal with this. So Nintendo goes first, Sony shortly thereafter. Microsoft sticks around, and it's like, well, now that both the other manufacturers are out, we can use this as our prime stage to show off the best things that we have. Then COVID strikes, and COVID shows why like a physical E3 isn't really that necessary. So E3 2021 is not really in person. They have kind of a stage for media, and they have a way for people to roll out stuff. But the primary use of E3, which was being like a way for game makers to show off stuff to get shelf space by retailers. So a lot of these backdoor conversations would be happening between like Walmart and Sony to get game purchase, or to get allotments purchased. Digital distribution becomes a thing. These things become less important to the game publishers. Likewise, no one wants to be on stage anymore, not in a way that they can't control, and so this really takes a hit at E3, and with COVID happening and it all going virtual, it really shows that this isn't really a thing that we need. Meanwhile, Jeff Keighley takes his video game prominence and says, hey, we can do Summer Games Fest and kind of compete with this. Then 2022 comes down, and opposed to doing a live show or even a broadcasted show, they're just cut out of it entirely. And the move they can blame on COVID, but I think in reality it was them taking that opportunity to take a step back and say, we really need to redefine what it is that we're doing and what's the purpose of E3. Because now we have PAX to compete with, we have our own E3, we have GDC to some degree, and the retailing aspect isn't just as strong anymore because digital distribution is way more important to game publishers now than physical copies on shelves. So all this is said and done, E3 looks like it's on its last legs, and I think if you asked anybody around the time we were watching Summer Games Fest at the beginning of July or June, I think most people would have said, I'm not sure if E3 is coming back. But we get an announcement this week that E3 it will be working, or ESA, which is the people who put on GDC and E3, had said, actually, we're going to be working with ReedPop. ReedPop is the organization that has been doing PAX, and not only PAX, but New York Comic Con. So two huge cultural events that are super important to nerd fandoms, like groups that have like high community and user engagement. And we see that ESA is taking a page from them and working with them for what E3 is going to become. So I think we're getting a total redefinition of what E3 is, and hopefully they're kind of taking a step back and refocusing and saying, like, it's not a retailer event anymore. It's definitely not a dev event anymore, not one in which devs work with each other and learn about how technology is made. And Summer Games Fest has shown that it's more of a fan event than anything else. Like, we're trying to show what the future of the game industry is. It's important to focus on like this sort of futurism idea of what video games have been, and it's a difficult thing to capture, especially with your biggest publishers coming out. But I think they can really use like the presence of E3 to shine a spotlight on games, and give like spotlight to AA and indie developers that have like really interesting titles coming out, and giving this like big media spotlight to them, because at this point, like AA and indie games functionally are more like games used to be back 10 years ago, where smaller budgets, faster turnaround time, and you could generally a solid concept could be sold pretty well at an E3 and get a lot of hype behind it. And these AAA games just don't really have a spot there. Instead, they have a spot and their own sort of pedestal that is made for them by Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo. So it becoming more a fan event, and being focused on like the future of gaming and what you can expect, kind of like how PAX is, I think opens up this really big opportunity that they've been sort of dancing around for so long, and maybe codify it as an actual game event that can be utilized for good purpose instead of one that's still trying to struggle with what its actual identity is. So that's it with that one. Last bit of news. Unity, the game engine that a lot of indie developers use, are going to be merging with Iron Source. What this actually means is Unity, the game engine that mobile games use, a lot of independent developers, some of the smaller teams from like AAA studios will also use it, but they have been sort of on a kick buying new companies that are kind of redefining what Unity is. And this is important because they're kind of at a inflection point as a company that needs to kind of figure out exactly what they're doing. I say this because Unity as a product focused mostly as an indie development engine. At the time that Unity came out, Unreal was a very expensive engine to use for game developers. Even with small companies, you'd still pay a good chunk. And Unity coming out and becoming successful really put Unreal on the back foot, trying to redefine like what their game engine was and how it was going to be used. Unreal has the benefit of making some killer games like Fortnite, or Epic, who owns Unreal, makes Fortnite, and that kind of pays for the development of Unreal, and allows it to be the engine that it is for a lot of the game developers. But Unity is still trying to figure out exactly how it's going to make scalable money. The biggest thing about Unity as a company is that it kind of plateaued. there's only so much growth you could do as you're opening up the door for new game developers. But as game developers kind of in mass hit the engine, it started plateauing. Like they can't see the same sort of growth that they want to sell investors on. So they really need to find new ways of monetizing. And they're kind of taking pages from Unreal in that respect, where they've kind of branched out into a couple of other areas that include corporate companies. Corporate companies and industrial application. The biggest which are like using Unity to develop your car graphics for modern cars that have big LCD screens and pretty beefy computers that allow them to create interactive and engaging UXs, UIs for the cars. That's one place that they found a lot of success. Another one's entertainment, whereas we find Unreal have found a lot of success allowing taking ideas from the game industry, real-time rendering, and applying it to film production, which allows streamlined which allows for streamlined production. Not in all applications, but in quite a few. Most notably, like Mandalorian have used it to great effect to create pre-visualization visuals that the whole cast can see and act on. And then those previs work can then be finalized, and there's not a huge gulf from what is captured on film and what is rendered out in your post-processing visual effects pipeline. Really great for those applications, and has been a good business for Unreal. Unity has been approaching this as well. So they've had a bunch of purchases that are in line with this way of thinking. But this last week, we saw Unity lay off a good chunk of their employees, and a lot of internal strife and unhappiness with what's gone on, and a lot of assurances that things were going well by John Riccitiello, CEO of Unity, but in reality, layoffs happened, and they're undergoing some sort of restructuring that's kind of refocusing where their development time is going to be spent. Riccitiello is the most pragmatic business person that has made its way into the game industry. It's kind of a weird mix. He was at EA prior to this, and he kind of was the oversight of probably one of EA's worst periods in time with game production development. This is where we saw like a lot of methods to try to maximize profit by forcing multiplayer games into single player games so that they would have longer shelf life and it wouldn't go into GameStop. Like a game wouldn't get resold into GameStop quickly. So trying to do that, trying to copy a lot of things that Call of Duty did by creating like these awards and achievement systems in multiplayer games to try to keep the stickiness there. And then you saw the emergence of loot boxes and other methods of pulling money out of people. And this is especially during the PS4 era, we saw a lot of this where it became questionable, like what kind of DLC is DLC. When's a game not complete, and when you expect us to buy even more game via DLC to actually get the full experience. Battlefront 2 was one example of this, or not Battlefront, Star Wars Battlefront 2, I think, was an example of this where people felt like they got half a game and then the rest of the game came later in downloadable packages. Not a great time for EA, and they're beginning to get back down to the roots. Like Riccitiello's tenure is when we saw like the abandonment of single player games like Dead Space and this whole embracing of multiplayer games that like abandon one part of their games. And I think people are saying like there's a balance here. We can have these multiplayer games that are great, but don't make it seem like it's only a partial thing, and give us more single player games because we like those too. Now, Riccitiello moves to Unity and becomes CEO there, and we're seeing a very odd restructuring, and I think maybe some parallels that might reflect this in the way Unity has to redefine what exactly it is. Is it a independent game developer engine first and foremost, or is it transforming into something that treats the independent game development group as like secondary to where they find more money to be made? So this is where this purchase comes in. Iron Source is purchased for $4.4 billion. It's a merger. It's wholly owned by Unity at this point in time. However, the CEO, I think, from Iron Source is now a board member in the board of advisors for Unity. We also saw a $1 billion reinvestment from Sequoia Capital and Silver Lake. These are two big Silicon Valley-ish investment companies that have invested in lots of tech companies. So we're seeing this reinvestment. So whatever it is that Unity is sharing with their investors as their forward plan is promising enough that we're seeing another large investment by Sequoia Capital and Silver Lake. So the real question now comes in is, what exactly is Iron Source's like strategic benefit to Unity? They are a company that has been in like more seedy parts of software development. A lot of people would have considered the way that they've done things as spyware. In fact, some countries have treated it as such. But they are particularly good at data mining. This is their specialty. Is they're really good at embedding software on computers and pulling in useful data that they can then sell later. Now, Unity has gone down this path before, but it didn't really pan out. And this strategic purchase of $4.4 billion for Ironclad looks to be them trying to give their data collection attempts a shot in the arm. Now, if you listen to John Riccitiello, he says that this is a more important strategy of creating an end-to-end pipeline for game developers to create monetization opportunities using the data that's collected by Ironclad and feeding that into a system that will place accurate ads that have better engagement rates and create engagement methods that may or may not be appealing to the users of these games. All sounds good, right? Like we need to have monetization in games to some degree. Although independent developers a lot tend to just be happy with being able to sell a game, doing particularly well, and then being able to make, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on a successful small budget project. But I think Riccitiello in this purchase kind of point to a place where they think monetization of games, them being the middleman and probably skimming off of it and being the broker of ads, is important as well, because this becomes another monetization method. It will be their next important area of development and growth as a company. Now, the issue with this is that it's kind of at odds with what Unity has historically been. Unity, more than anything else, has been a place where hobbyists and independent game developers have been able to get an engine that is powerful, be able to purchase assets to build their games efficiently, and be able to build games. But this is not the business that is the bread and butter for Unity. It hasn't been for a long time. Like, it does not make them that much money. Their other endeavors have. Them saying, actually, monetization is important, and we're going to provide the tools for you. And so if you're an independent developer, think about monetizations by using ads and ad placement. But I think what this says more than anything else is that the types of games that use monetization, mostly mobile types, and those in games that use slot machine type mechanics that actually were in question when we talked last week about Spain cracking down on certain game design philosophies that could be considered illegal. It sounds like Unity is saying, no, we actually want these sort of mechanisms because monetization and being able to extract money from your customer and using us as the middleman for it is an extremely important area for our future growth. What that means for developers in the long term, unclear, right? Like, it may not affect the way the engine behaves fundamentally, so independent developers can continue to develop there. possibly new opportunities with being able to embed things that into their games to allow for better monetization for ad placement and potential opportunities there. And I think this also speaks to future development of theirs that they may or may not be doing, but likely some version of a metaverse engine that it's not just going to be mobile type display ads, but what can we do in a more persistent online world where ad placement is going to be important, and figuring out how to be the most engaging ad in the meta space by collecting tons and tons of data. How can we most optimize that? So Unity is undergoing a big change. It may not mean anything for developers. It just might mean that you have new tools available, but it also might mean that Unity as a company just doesn't put as much focus on it as a development engine for people who are independent game developers who just want to create like an interesting experience, and more about games that can generate long-term revenue through monetization and the other areas of industrial and commercial application that also is a big revenue stream for them. So that's it for today. Sorry, it was solo. I know I could be long-winded, but it's just me talking, so it's kind of strange to do it on my own. If you like this content, like I've said before, we're on YouTube and Twitch. YouTube.com/SonicBloomTV, Twitch.tv/SonicBloomTV. You can find us at either of those live every Thursday at 6 p.m. And if you want to see any of the old content, like last week's talk about monetization in Spain cracking down on things, you can check out that video on YouTube. If you do like the content, like and subscribe, please. It helps us out. Hopefully we'll see you next week. I hope you enjoy the content.